Wade Hartley had fixed this shelf 3 times this month. It was never broken. The $12 million penthouse stretched around him like a museum after closing. No photographs on the walls, no scent of cooking, no proof that anyone actually lived here. The woman who owned it stood by the window, her designer suit perfect, her reflection hollow. She always found reasons to keep him longer. A faucet that didn't leak, a door that closed just fine, a light bulb that never flickered. Tonight, his toolbox was packed. His 6-year-old daughter was waiting at home. But when he reached for the door handle, her hand caught his wrist. Her fingers trembled against his calloused skin. "Stay with me tonight or—" Her voice cracked. Not the voice of a CEO commanding boardrooms, but something raw, something drowning. Wade turned, and in her eyes, he saw it. This wasn't seduction. This was a woman who had everything except a reason to breathe. What she said next would change both their lives forever. The call had come at 7 in the morning, same number as the past 3 weeks. Wade recognized it before he even looked at the screen. The penthouse on Lexington, top floor. The woman who always sounded like she was reading from a script when she described what needed fixing. "The shelf in the living room," she had said, her voice flat, rehearsed. "It's loose again." He didn't bother pointing out that he had tightened every screw just 5 days ago, that the shelf was made of Italian marble mounted on steel brackets that could hold 300 pounds without flinching. Some customers wanted things fixed. Others just wanted someone to show up. Penny was already awake when he hung up, her small body wrapped around his leg like a koala refusing to let go of its tree. "Can I come with you today, Daddy?" She asked the same question every morning, and every morning he had to find a new way to say no. But today was different. His mother had called at 6, her voice thick with apology. The church needed help setting up for the weekend fundraiser, and she couldn't watch Penny until noon. Wade looked down at his daughter, her tangled hair and mismatched socks, and sighed. "You have to sit on the couch and not touch anything. Promise?" Penny's face exploded into a grin that made every sleepless night worth it. "I promise, Daddy. I'll be like a statue. A really quiet statue." The elevator to the penthouse was silent except for the soft hum of machinery, the kind of quiet that cost money. Wade held Penny's hand as they rose past floor after floor, watching her reflection in the polished brass doors. She was making faces at herself, completely unaware of the world they were entering. He had been inside the penthouse 3 times now, and each time it struck him the same way. Cold. Not the temperature, but something deeper. The furniture was expensive, the view was spectacular, and there wasn't a single thing that looked like someone actually lived there. No shoes by the door, no coffee cup left on the counter, no evidence of life. Sloane Ashford opened the door before he could knock, as if she had been waiting just on the other side. She was dressed impeccably. Tailored blouse, pencil skirt, heels that probably cost more than his monthly rent. But her eyes told a different story. They landed on Penny first, widening slightly, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Surprise, curiosity, something else Wade couldn't name. "I didn't know you had a daughter," she said, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. Wade felt Penny squeeze his hand tighter. "She's just here for a bit. She'll sit on the couch, won't touch anything." He said it like a warning, but Sloane was already crouching down to Penny's level, her designer skirt folding awkwardly. "What's your name?" Penny looked up at Wade for permission, and when he nodded, she whispered, "Penny." Like the coin. The shelf was exactly where he had left it, exactly as sturdy as it had been 5 days ago. Wade ran his hand along the brackets, checked the screws, pressed his palm flat against the marble surface. Nothing moved. Nothing wobbled. He glanced back at Sloane, who was standing by the window with her arms crossed, watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "It's secure," he said carefully. "Same as last week." She didn't respond right away. just kept staring out at the city below, like she was looking for something she had lost. "Check the faucet in the bathroom," she finally said. "I think it might be dripping." Wade had fixed that faucet 2 weeks ago. It wasn't dripping then, and he was certain it wasn't dripping now. But he nodded anyway and picked up his toolbox, leaving Penny on the oversized leather couch with strict instructions to stay put. The bathroom was larger than Wade's entire bedroom, all white marble and chrome fixtures that gleamed under soft, recessed lighting. The faucet was dry. He checked the handles, the aerator, the connections beneath the sink. Everything was pristine, untouched, like the bathroom in a hotel room that had never been used. Wade stood there for a moment, his hands braced against the counter, and let the truth settle over him like a weight. She wasn't calling him for repairs. She was calling him for something else entirely, something she couldn't name, maybe something she didn't even understand herself. He thought about his wife, about the last months before the accident when she had started finding reasons to keep him home. "Stay for breakfast. Help me hang this picture. Just sit with me for a minute." She had been lonely too, in her own way. He just hadn't seen it until it was too late. When Wade returned to the living room, he found Penny standing in front of a potted plant in the corner, the only living thing in the entire penthouse besides the three of them. The plant was brown and withered, its leaves curled inward, like hands protecting themselves from a blow. "Daddy, look," Penny whispered, her voice heavy with the kind of sorrow only children can feel for dying things. "The plant is sick." Before Wade could stop her, she reached out and touched one of the brittle leaves. It crumbled instantly, falling to the floor in a shower of brown dust. The pot teetered on its stand, and then, in slow motion, it tipped and crashed to the ground, shattering across the pristine hardwood. Wade's heart stopped. He rushed forward, already reaching for Penny, already formulating apologies and offers to pay for whatever that pot had cost, probably more than his car. But Sloane got there first. She stood over the shattered remains, staring down at the mess of soil and broken ceramic, and her face did something Wade didn't expect. It softened. "It's been dead for months," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I bought it when I moved in, 3 years ago. I thought—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I just couldn't throw it away." Penny looked up at her with wide, worried eyes. "Why is your house so sad?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. Wade opened his mouth to apologize, to scold Penny for being rude. But Sloane's expression stopped him. She looked like someone who had just been asked a question she had been avoiding for years. The silence stretched until Sloane finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, sweetheart. I think I forgot how to make it happy." Wade watched something pass between his daughter and this woman, this stranger who lived in a palace of glass and chrome and owned nothing that mattered. Penny nodded seriously, as if Sloane had just shared something profound. "My daddy makes our house happy. He sings in the shower and burns pancakes." Sloane laughed, a real laugh, unexpected and bright, and Wade felt something shift in the room. The cold retreated, just a little. "I should go clean this up," he said, gesturing to the broken pot. "I'm sorry about—" But Sloane was already shaking her head. "Leave it. Please. Actually—" She hesitated, and Wade saw her composure flicker like a candle in wind. "I ordered too much food. For dinner. Would you and Penny like to stay?" It was an obvious lie, the kind of lie people tell when they don't know how to ask for what they really need. Wade looked at his daughter, still standing amid the ruins of the dead plant, and then at Sloane, who was watching them with an expression that reminded him of someone standing at the edge of a cliff. "We'd like that," he heard himself say. "But Penny's picky. She probably won't eat whatever fancy stuff you ordered." Sloane's relief was palpable, even though she tried to hide it behind a businesslike nod. "I'll manage." But she didn't manage. Not even close. The delivery arrived 20 minutes later. Sushi, lobster rolls, something with caviar that made Penny wrinkle her nose. And Wade watched Sloane's face fall as she realized none of it was appropriate for a 6-year-old. "I don't know what children eat," she admitted, the first honest thing she had said all day. "I never had to learn." Wade found himself in her kitchen, a space that looked like it had never been used, pulling ingredients from a refrigerator stocked with expensive items that had clearly been purchased and forgotten. He made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from a can he found buried in the back of a cabinet. Penny sat at the marble island, swinging her legs and chattering about her teacher and her best friend and the goldfish she wanted for her birthday. Sloane listened like someone learning a new language, nodding at all the wrong moments, asking questions that were slightly off. "What color is your teacher?" "Do goldfish have feelings?" But trying, really trying. And when Penny laughed at one of her awkward questions, something in Sloane's face opened like a door that had been locked for years. They stayed for 3 hours. Wade fixed the shelf again, properly this time, even though it hadn't needed fixing, and then checked every other thing in the penthouse he could think of. The garbage disposal, the hinges on the closet doors, a window that supposedly stuck but opened smoothly at his touch. Penny fell asleep on the couch somewhere around 8, her small body curled into the leather cushions, and Wade found himself sitting across from Sloane in a silence that felt different from the cold emptiness of before. "Thank you," she said finally, "for staying." Wade nodded, not sure what to say. "She's a good kid. Easy to spend time with." Sloane's eyes drifted to Penny's sleeping form. "I can see that." There was something in her voice, longing, maybe, or grief, that made Wade want to ask questions he had no right to ask. The calls kept coming, every few days, sometimes more often, always with a new excuse: a creaky floorboard, a slow drain, a light switch that felt loose. Wade stopped pretending he was there to fix things. He brought Penny every time, and every time Sloane seemed to breathe a little easier when she saw the small girl at his side. The penthouse began to change in small ways. Penny's drawings appeared on the refrigerator, held up with magnets shaped like fruit that Sloane had bought specifically for that purpose. A fuzzy blanket materialized on the couch, pink with cartoon unicorns, clearly meant for someone much smaller than its owner. A second toothbrush showed up in the bathroom, child-sized, next to Sloane's electric one. One evening, Wade found Sloane attempting to read Penny a bedtime story. She was sitting stiffly on the couch, the book held at arm's length like a business report, her voice flat and rhythmic as she recited the words. And then the princess realized she had been sleeping for 100 years. Penny giggled, covering her mouth with both hands. "You sound like a robot, Miss Sloane." Wade expected embarrassment, maybe even irritation, but Sloane just looked at Penny with genuine confusion. "How do you do it differently?" Penny took the book from her hands and demonstrated, her voice rising and falling with dramatic flair, adding sound effects and different voices for each character. Sloane watched with an intensity that made Wade's chest tight. She was studying Penny like someone trying to memorize something precious before it disappeared. The shift happened slowly, then all at once. Wade started noticing things about Sloane that she tried to hide. The way her hands trembled slightly when she thought no one was looking. The way she sometimes stood at the window for hours without moving. The way she flinched when her phone rang. One night, Penny fell asleep early, and Wade found himself alone with Sloane for the first time. They sat in the kitchen, coffee growing cold between them, and she told him about her life. Not the version on the company website, not the glossy magazine profiles, but the real story. The 17-hour days, the board meetings that felt like warfare, the way success had built walls around her so high she couldn't see over them anymore. "I have 300 employees," she said, staring into her cup. And I can't name a single person who would notice if I didn't come home tonight. Wade told her about his wife, about the accident, a drunk driver, a Tuesday afternoon, a phone call that split his life into before and after, about the months afterward when he couldn't get out of bed, when Penny had to learn to make her own breakfast at 4 years old because her father was drowning in the other room, about his mother, who had moved in for 6 months and saved both their lives with her quiet, stubborn love. Grief is lonely, he said, even when you're surrounded by people. Sloane looked at him then, really looked, and Wade saw recognition in her eyes. I've been grieving something I never had, she said. I think that might be lonelier. He didn't ask what she meant, not yet, but he filed the words away, sensing they were important, a key to a door she wasn't ready to open. Penny got sick on a Thursday. Nothing serious, just a fever and a stomach bug that left her pale and clingy. Wade canceled his jobs for the day and was about to take her home when Sloane appeared in the living room with a thermometer, a glass of ginger ale, and a cool washcloth that she pressed to Penny's forehead with surprising gentleness. I know what to do, she said, when Wade started to protest. Let me help. He watched her care for his daughter, with movements that were practiced, almost automatic, checking temperature, adjusting pillows, humming a soft melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in her memory. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. Sloane's hand stilled on the washcloth. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Once, she finally said, a long time ago, I was supposed to. That night, after Penny's fever broke and she drifted into peaceful sleep, Wade found Sloane standing alone on the balcony. The city spread out below them, millions of lights, millions of lives, and she looked so small against all of it. He stepped out beside her and waited. I was 22, she said without preamble, still staring at the skyline. Senior year of college. His name was Daniel. We were going to get married after graduation, have the whole life, house, kids, dog, everything. Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the railing so hard her knuckles had gone white. I got pregnant in the spring, and my family, my mother especially, they said it would ruin everything. My career, my future, all of it. They said I had to choose. Wade didn't speak. He barely breathed. So I chose, Sloane continued, her voice cracking now like ice beginning to break. I chose the career, the empire, the penthouse with the view. And Daniel left because he couldn't look at me anymore. And my family was so proud of me for being sensible. And I told myself it was the right decision. I told myself that every single day for 12 years. She turned to face him, and Wade saw tears streaming down her face, the first tears he had ever seen from her. I haven't let myself be around children since then. It hurt too much. And then Penny walked into my apartment with her tangled hair and her mismatched socks, and she smiled at me like I was a real person, not a CEO or a client or a name on a door. And I couldn't stop calling you. I couldn't stop making up broken things because I needed to see her. I needed to see both of you. Wade thought about all the times he had noticed her watching Penny, the longing in her eyes, the way she lit up when his daughter laughed, the careful way she touched Penny's hair when she thought no one was looking. Why didn't you tell me? Sloane laughed bitterly. What was I supposed to say? Hi, I'm your client, and I've been lying about my plumbing because your daughter makes me feel something I've been running from for over a decade? She shook her head. You would have thought I was insane. Wade considered this. Probably, he admitted. But I also would have understood. More than you think. He told her about his own loss then. Not just his wife, but the baby she had been carrying. 8 weeks along, too early to know if it was a boy or girl, but not too early to have hopes, dreams, plans. We both lost someone we never got to meet, he said quietly. Maybe that's why this feels like more than just a handyman and a client. The penthouse had begun to feel different, warmer, lived in. There were magnets on the refrigerator now holding up Penny's artwork, and a small plant on the windowsill, a succulent that Sloane had bought because Penny said it was impossible to kill. The cold museum feeling had retreated into the corners, replaced by something tentative and new. But Wade knew it couldn't last forever. The repairs were done, legitimately done this time, and he had no more excuses to keep coming back. When he told Sloane it was his last visit, that there was nothing left to fix, she nodded like she had been expecting it. But her face went pale, and her hands found each other in front of her, wringing together in a way that made her look nothing like a CEO. Penny didn't understand. She clung to Sloane's legs, crying, "I don't want to go. I want to stay with Miss Sloane forever." Wade tried to pry her away gently, apologizing over his daughter's sobs, feeling like he was tearing something delicate in half. "I'm sorry," he said to Sloane. "I should have prepared her better. I didn't think." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't know how to finish it. Sloane knelt down and hugged Penny tightly, whispering something in her ear that made the little girl's crying slow to hiccups. Then she stood, straightened her blouse, and looked at Wade with eyes that were bright with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." It sounded like goodbye. Wade picked up his toolbox. He walked to the door. His hand was on the handle when he felt her fingers close around his wrist, the same way they had that first night, trembling against his calloused skin. "Stay with me tonight, or—" Her voice broke on the word. Wade turned around slowly. "Or what?" She swallowed hard, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Or I'll go back to being the woman who has everything except a reason to come home." The words hit him like a physical force. He saw it all then. The empty penthouse, the dead plant, the shelf that never needed fixing. The years of success that had built a prison around her so complete, she couldn't find the door. "Sloane," he said gently, "what do you really need from me?" She told him everything then. About the loneliness that had become so familiar, she had stopped noticing it. About the nights she walked through the penthouse just to hear the sound of her own footsteps. About the way she had arranged her life so perfectly that there was no room in it for anything real. "I've spent 12 years proving I made the right choice," she said, "building something to justify what I gave up. And now I'm standing in this beautiful apartment that feels like a tomb, and I don't know how to be a person anymore. I don't know how to have dinner with someone without it being a business meeting. I don't know how to read a bedtime story without sounding like I'm delivering a quarterly report." She laughed, but it came out as something closer to a sob. "I don't know how to let anyone in." Wade looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Penny, who had fallen asleep on the couch with her thumb in her mouth, exhausted from crying. "You've already let us in," he said quietly. "You just didn't notice." Sloane shook her head. "But you're leaving. And tomorrow, this place will be empty again. And I'll—" Wade held up his hand to stop her. "I'm not staying tonight," he said. "Not like that. Not because you're scared and lonely and asking me to fill a gap." Sloane's face crumpled, and he saw her preparing for rejection, building walls back up brick by brick. But he wasn't finished. "I'm not staying tonight, because that's not what you need. You don't need someone to stay because you asked them to. You need someone to stay because they want to." He picked up his toolbox again, but this time he didn't walk toward the door. Instead, he walked toward the couch where Penny lay sleeping. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "Penny has art class in the park, 9 o'clock. There's a spot under the big oak tree where the parents sit." He looked back at Sloane, saw the confusion on her face slowly transforming into something like hope. "If you want to come, not because I'm asking, not because you're lonely, but because you actually want to be there, then come. No pressure, no expectations. Just a Saturday morning in the park." He gathered Penny into his arms, her small body warm and heavy with sleep. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around. "I think you made the wrong choice 12 years ago, but I also think you've been punishing yourself for it ever since, and that's not helping anyone, especially not you." Then he left, and the door clicked shut behind him, and Sloane stood alone in her $12 million penthouse, surrounded by everything she had ever wanted and none of what she needed. She didn't sleep that night. The penthouse had never felt so quiet, so achingly empty. She sat on the couch where Penny had been lying, her hand pressed against the leather where a small warmth still lingered, and traced her fingers over the impression the child's body had left in the cushion. She walked to the refrigerator and stood there for a long moment, looking at the drawings held up by fruit-shaped magnets. A purple house with a yellow sun, stick figures labeled "Me" and "Daddy," and, in newer handwriting, "Miss Sloane." The misspelling made her smile through the ache in her chest. She thought about Daniel, about the baby that never was, about all the choices that had led her to this moment. And for the first time in 12 years, she let herself feel it all without running away. The grief, the regret, the terrible aching want for something she had convinced herself she didn't deserve. The tears came then, silent and unstoppable, and she let them fall without wiping them away. For the first time in 12 years, she wasn't performing strength. She was just feeling. Morning came slow and gray, clouds hanging low over the city like a held breath, like the sky itself was waiting to see what she would do. Sloane stood in her closet for 20 minutes, staring at rows of designer clothes that suddenly seemed absurd, costumes for a life that no longer fit. She didn't own jeans. She didn't own anything that wasn't meant for a boardroom or a charity gala. In the end, she pulled on the most casual thing she could find: linen pants and a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's monthly groceries, and looked at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman staring back. Her hair was down, uncombed. Her face was bare of makeup. She looked vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to look in years. She looked human. The park was only a 15-minute walk from her building, but Sloane had never been there. Not once in 3 years. She had passed it 1,000 times in taxis and town cars, glimpsed it from her windows on Sunday mornings while answering emails, but she had never actually set foot on its winding paths or sat beneath its ancient trees. The thought struck her as profoundly sad. All this beauty just blocks away, and she had been too busy building walls to notice. Now she walked through the entrance like someone entering a foreign country, hyper-aware of every sound and smell. Children laughing, dogs barking, the earthy scent of grass still wet with morning dew. She found the oak tree easily. It was enormous, its branches spreading wide like arms, offering an embrace, and beneath it sat a cluster of parents on blankets and folding chairs. Wade was there, cross-legged on a plaid blanket, watching Penny at an easel 20 feet away. He saw her before she could decide whether to approach or flee. His face registered surprise, then something warmer. Pleasure, maybe, or relief. He raised a hand in a small wave, and Sloane felt her feet carrying her forward before she could overthink it. "You came," he said as she sat down beside him, her linen pants immediately staining with grass. "I wasn't sure if I should," she admitted. "I'm not good at this. Any of this." Wade smiled. "Neither was I at first. After my wife died, I didn't leave the house for 3 months. Penny basically raised herself for a while there. We figured it out together." Sloane looked at him, really looked, and saw the shadows under his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the quiet strength of a man who had been broken and put himself back together piece by piece. "How?" she asked. "How do you figure it out?" Before Wade could answer, Penny spotted Sloane and came running across the grass, her small feet barely touching the ground, her hands covered in paint, her face split by the biggest smile Sloane had ever seen directed at her. "Miss Sloane, you're here! Look, I painted a picture of you!" She thrust a wet canvas into Sloane's hands, a blob of brown hair, 2 blue dots for eyes, and a smile that took up half the face. "That's you being happy," Penny explained seriously, "because you're always sad at your house. But I think you'll be happy now, because you're at the park with us." Sloane looked at the painting, then at Penny, then at Wade. She felt something crack open in her chest. Not pain exactly, but the release of pressure that had been building for 12 years. "I think you might be right," she said, and her voice came out thick and strange. "I think I might be." The 3 of them spent the morning together, the hours slipping by unnoticed like water through open fingers. Penny painted more pictures. A purple dog with wings, a house made entirely of candy, Wade in a superhero cape, fighting what appeared to be a giant broccoli, while Sloane tried her hand at the easel and produced something that looked like a tornado hitting a paint factory during an earthquake. Penny declared it beautiful abstract art and insisted on keeping it. They ate sandwiches from a cart, and Sloane got mustard on her silk blouse and found that she didn't care. She listened to the other parents talk about school pickups and soccer practice and the best places to buy children's shoes, and she felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. But Wade kept catching her eye, smiling encouragingly, and somehow that made it okay. 3 months later, the penthouse had transformed into something unrecognizable to anyone who had known it before. Penny's artwork covered nearly every surface of the refrigerator, and new pieces had migrated to the walls, framed properly now in bright, colorful frames, hung at child's eye level alongside prints that had cost thousands, but now seemed less important than the crayon masterpieces beside them. The dead plant was gone, replaced by a collection of succulents that Penny watered religiously every Tuesday. There were toys in a basket by the couch, a step stool in the bathroom, and a drawer in the kitchen filled with snacks, approved by both Penny and Sloane's nutritionist. The space still had its marble floors and floor-to-ceiling windows, but it no longer felt like a museum. It felt like somewhere people actually lived. Sloane still ran her company, still commanded boardrooms and closed deals, and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. But she left the office by 6 now. Sometimes earlier, if Penny had a school play, or Wade was making his famous terrible spaghetti. Her board had noticed the change and whispered about it in meetings. Was she losing her edge? Getting soft? But her numbers were better than ever, and when Forbes called for their annual interview, she told them the secret to her success was learning to delegate. She didn't tell them about the handyman who had taught her that strength wasn't about control, or the 6-year-old who had shown her that happiness didn't require perfection. Some things weren't meant for magazine profiles. Some things were just for her. Wade never moved into the penthouse. He kept his small apartment across town, the one with the creaky floors and the window that stuck, and he and Penny came to Sloane's place on weekends. They cooked dinner together, actual cooking now, not just grilled cheese, though that remained Penny's favorite. They watched movies on the massive TV that Sloane had previously used only for financial news. They fell asleep on the couch in a tangle of limbs and blankets, and sometimes Sloane would wake in the middle of the night and just look at them, these 2 people who had wandered into her life because a shelf didn't need fixing. She would watch Penny's chest rise and fall, see Wade's hand resting protectively on his daughter's back, and she would think about all the choices that had led her here, the right ones, the wrong ones, the ones she couldn't change and the ones she still could. One Saturday afternoon, Wade was fixing the kitchen cabinet. It actually needed fixing this time, a hinge worn loose from genuine use, when Penny wandered over and tugged on his shirt. "Daddy," she said in that serious voice children use when they're about to say something important, "why do you keep fixing stuff at Miss Sloane's house?" Wade set down his screwdriver and crouched to her level. "Because some things need to be fixed, sweetheart." Penny thought about this for a moment. "But Miss Sloane's not broken anymore," she said. "You already fixed her." Wade felt his throat tighten. He looked over at Sloane, who was standing at the window with a cup of coffee, watching them with an expression he had come to know well. Gratitude mixed with wonder, like someone who still couldn't quite believe any of this was real. "You know what, Pen?" he said quietly. "I think she fixed herself. We just helped her remember how." That night, after Penny had been tucked into the guest room that was slowly becoming her room, purple walls now, fairy lights strung around the window, a bookshelf filled with stories Sloane read aloud in a voice that no longer sounded like a quarterly report. Wade and Sloane sat on the balcony together. The city glittered below them, the same view Sloane had stared at for 3 years without really seeing. But tonight it looked different. Tonight it looked like possibility. "I've been thinking," Sloane said, her hand finding his on the armrest of her chair, "about what you said that night, about making the wrong choice." Wade waited, feeling her fingers intertwine with his, rough and smooth, 2 different kinds of strength. "I think you were right," she continued. "I did make the wrong choice, but I also think—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I think maybe some wrong choices lead us to right places, eventually, if we're lucky." Wade squeezed her hand but didn't speak. He had learned that sometimes Sloane needed to find her own way to the words, and interrupting only made it harder. "I can't get back what I lost," she said finally. "I can't undo what I did. But I can stop pretending it didn't matter. I can stop building walls and calling them success." She turned to face him, and in the soft light of the city, her eyes were bright but clear. No tears tonight, just truth. "I want to learn how to be a person again. A real person, not a CEO or a brand or a name on a building. And I want to learn with you. Both of you." Wade reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so simple and intimate that Sloane felt it in her chest like a key turning in a lock. "You're already learning," he said. "You've been learning since the day Penny broke your plant." Downstairs, in the living room, a single framed photograph sat on the shelf that had never needed fixing. It showed 3 people in a park, caught mid-laugh, a man with calloused hands and kind eyes, a little girl with paint on her nose and joy in every line of her face, and a woman who had once had everything except what mattered. They weren't a perfect picture. Wade's hair was messy, Penny was blurry from movement, and Sloane's smile was still a little uncertain, like someone relearning a skill they had almost forgotten. But it was real. It was proof. In a penthouse that had been empty for 3 years, on a shelf that had never been broken, there was finally something worth keeping. And beside the photograph, in a small frame of its own, hung a child's drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a wobbly yellow sun, with words scrawled at the bottom in crayon that was already beginning to fade. "My family." The words were simple, the handwriting wobbly, the crayon already beginning to fade at the edges. But they were the truest thing in that $12 million penthouse. Sloane looked at them every morning before she left for work, running her finger lightly over the letters. And every morning, she remembered what Wade had told her on that first night when she had asked him to stay. Some things aren't broken. They just need someone patient enough to see what they could become. Outside the window, the city stretched toward the horizon, millions of lives unfolding in millions of ways. But here, in this penthouse that had once been a prison of her own making, Sloane Ashford had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not perfection, not success. Just this, a shelf that needed fixing, a child's drawing on the wall, and the quiet certainty that tomorrow they would all be here again, together.